Surgeons of Reddit, what is the most fucked up thing seen in someone's body? Guy had put a cucumber down his throat and it broke off so he couldn't pull it back out. He came in with his wife. Surgeon here. Trauma patient with who fell on steel rebar and it went in one side of the chest and out the other side long ways. Somehow missed his heart, esophagus, major arteries. We removed it with no critical injuries. Edit, for those asking, he came in very stable so we were able to do imaging and see no obvious major vessel or heart injury. We then removed it in the operating room in case moving it revealed an injury, basically completely ready to crack the chest if he started bleeding, but otherwise just pulled it out. Got bilateral chest tubes but did not end up needing any large surgeries. I saw a show where they tested something like that. A guy had slipped and fell on a plant stake that went from the bottom right ribcage, up through the chest and out the left side of his neck. I think he even walked into the ER like that, and there was surprisingly little trauma for what looked absolutely horrible. The show came to the conclusion that his saving grace was that the stake was dull/not sharp, so it kinda pushed past everything critical without serious damage. Their experiment with a sharpened stake was much more lethal. Definitely one lucky guy. Visor, giant hairball, in the exact shape of a stomach. Turns out, she worked at a hair salon and was eating other people's hair. Cement. I work in derma and had a couple of women come with cement injected in their face and didn't know why they couldn't feel their face/do certain facial expressions. And yes, they wanted a discount dermatologist so they went to Mexico. Neurosurgeon here. Guy came into the hospital with 3 days of headache out of nowhere. Head CT showed a large nail through the anterior skull base, think above the nose, between the forehead. When asked about it, he had been using a pneumatic nail gun a couple days before. He remembered a moment when he didn't brace the gun right and it rebounded, hitting him in the face. It must have fired a nail when the end hit him in the face and he didn't realize it. He indeed did have a small wound in his cheek that fit with the story. Luckily the nail avoided the large blood vessels and other critical structures in the brain. We had to take him to surgery in order to pull it out. Cutting it out of his brain was weird. Dentist. We had 2 men come into reception, one of whom had a snooker ball in his mouth. The man who didn't explain that they'd been at the snooker club down the road and his friend bet someone 50 pounds that he could fit a snooker ball in his mouth. He won the bet, then found he couldn't get it out. We had to sedate him and dislocate his jaw to remove it. Dislocating his jaw and taking the ball out was actually pretty quick and easy. The part that took longest was getting him sedated. Also, I had no idea snooker was such an English thing. Former emergency room technician. Had an older gentleman come in with a mayonnaise jar that he filled with water and goldfish up his ass. My mother-in-law used to be a scrub nurse and she told us a story about a patient they had in the operating room who purposely cut up little bits of a metal coat hanger and barbed them so they couldn't be removed, then proceeded to shove them up his urethra. I can't remember the actual medical term for it, but he was one of those people who had a mental health issue and wanted surgeries done, so he would constantly do terrible things to himself because they would have to surgically correct them. This reminds me of something that used to be done with P-word in prisons in my country. Other prisoners would insert a pipe on the guy's rectum and, after that, a barbed wire through the pipe, then remove the pipe. How do I unread this? Hamster is number 1. An entire door knob which ripped out of the door, screws and all. The guy swears he fell while putting on his shoes. After that, every time someone changed shoes to go to the OR, our little 80 years old Path would say, "Watch out for the doorknob. Don't turn your back on it," and laugh himself into a crying fit. Absolutely magical to see. This one's not my story. A buddy worked for a GYN. Had a pregnant PT come in to remove rotting fruit from her vagina. Several times a month. Her husband had a kink. They called her fruit salad. Not internal but external, a PT came in after being stabbed, at a county bar, and did not want his pants cut off. Turns out he had a kielbasa sausage taped to his inner thigh so it looked like a bulge in his Wranglers. The strangest one would be pulling out a 10-inch long strand of free-floating, unpigmented, hair from a 9-year-old girl's abdominal cavity. No idea how it got there. Edit, to answer some recurring questions, it definitely was not from a teratoma and was found by chance while performing another procedure. She then had exploratory surgery to further investigate and nothing abnormal was found. Not really fucked up, rather common but uncommon non-reaction. Dead cucumber inside a vagina. Wife and husband were playing with it, a bit broke off and never came out. So they just decided to ignore it. Started rotting inside and caused a bad secondary infection. The smell, secretions, And the sight of those morons' faces as they were explaining was priceless. One of the, now countless, days I felt something die inside me. Not a surgeon but a patient. I had emergency surgery about 20 years ago in a really small rural hospital. 2 months later I had to have another surgery in a better hospital because the doctors of the first surgery had accidentally left some items including gauze and a small cutting tool inside my body when they sewed me back up. Old man comes in with pain and a swollen foot, has an old dressing on his calf. We cut open the dressing and there are insects flying here and there. The whole area under was infested with maggots. Apparently he got a small prick from somewhere, got a dressing for the wound from a PHC and left it there for 4 to 5 months. There was no muscles left. Not a surgeon but a few years ago I read this story about a lady who was experiencing pain every time she sat down following a surgery. She went back to the hospital where they found out they had left a pair of scissors in her. I think the woman sued the hospital in the end for making her live with a pair of scissors inside of her for months. A man came into my clinic about really bad stomach pains, so I felt around his stomach and gave him an x-ray. What I found was 2 pool balls and key cars. I asked how this happened but all I could get out of him was, he was super blackout drunk. Had a lad dropped off at accident and emergency department with a crossbow bolt stuck in his upper thigh. His story was that he was walking through a local park with his loaded crossbow and tripped, shooting himself in his thigh. 2 days later another lad was dropped off at A&E with a Bowie knife stuck in his upper thigh. His story was that he was walking through a local park with the knife in his hand and tripped, stabbing himself in his thigh. It turned out that the first lad was a member of the Burger Bar Boys and the second lad was a member of the Johnson crew. Both were members of rival gangs and there had been an argument which had been sorted out. Not a surgeon, but this is a really fucked up story I've heard my mom tell a few times about her days in social work, usually to someone who is looking to get into social work, kind of a make sure you really want to do this thing. It's a bit long. She had a woman who was a regular, lot of mental issues, homebound. We'll call the woman Anne, no idea what her name is. She almost never moved from her chair, and I mean that literally. Pooped in the chair on the reg and just sat in it. I don't really know how she fed herself, maybe a different service brought her food. Regardless, nobody wanted to be there long because of the smell. This will be relevant later. Anyway, she calls my mom because she has a lump in her arm that's bugging her. Mom gets there, all the lights are out. Bulb is dead, this will be relevant later as well. No replacements in the house. Goes to a few other houses to try to get a bulb, and only one she can find is a green bulb she gets from a kid who is home alone for some reason. Goes back to Anne and screws in the bulb. Since it's a green bulb it's still pretty dim. Goes to look at the lump in her arm, which is visible even in the dim light, but then notices something weird is going on with Anne's legs. It looks like the skin is rippling like water. My mom asks about it and gets a non-response. Then she pokes her leg and it's basically hollow. She had diabetes apparently and her legs rotted, and the rippling was all the maggots eating the dead skin. They actually saved her life. I guess nobody noticed it was happening because they would basically just hand her food and take off. Probably the bulb had been out a while too. Oh, and the lump was a softball-sized tumor. So yeah. Social workers don't get paid enough.